And we are live. Hello everyone, and welcome to the stream. I hope you are all doing well. We started a bit later than what I advertised, but now we are a go, so I'm very happy to have you here for today's interview on the channel with a new member of the European Parliament. Hello, little Mystery. So tonight we will discuss with Italian MEP Brando Benifei from the Socialists and Democrats group, so on the left side of European politics. He is 35 and has been an MEP since 2014, meaning that he is in his second mandate. He currently sits in the Committee on the Internal Market and Consumer Protection and the Special Committee on Artificial Intelligence in the Digital Age. He is also a substitute member in the Committee on Employment and Social Affairs, the Committee on Legal Affairs, and the Committee on Constitutional Affairs. So quite a busy man. But before we start our conversation, as usual, I remind you of the house rules for anyone who would be new with us tonight. So I guess we'll be with us for an hour, around that. After that, he will be able to leave and enjoy the rest of his day and the weekend, but I will keep streaming with you for another half an hour to discuss with you what you thought about the interview, my own interpretation, give you some additional element of context or explanation that popped up in the conversation. As usual, I prepared my own question for Mr. Benifei, and I collected questions as well from people on Reddit and Discord. So you can also ask your own question live via the chat, and I will keep an eye on it and pick among your suggestions. So feel free to participate and react, but as always, don't spam and stay civil. So the goal of these interviews is for you to understand better what's the job of an MEP. In this tonight, who is Mr. Benifei, what are his priorities, and maybe some of his opinions on general EU political questions. As we have noticed across since we began these interviews, I try to invite a variety of MEPs so that they may share their opinion, that you and I may agree or not, but that's not the point. The aim is for you to observe this diversity that exists in Europe and build your own opinion, while my own role is to facilitate the discussion without taking a stand on the substance. So meaning that we will not go deep into policy discussions, and will not touch on national politics unless it's relevant to EU politics. So keep that in mind when asking your question. So without further ado, let's dive into this. So good afternoon and welcome to you, Mr. Brando Benifei. Thanks again for accepting to do this interview on my channel. You heard me explain it to our viewers. The goal of tonight is to put faces on the European Union and to help people understand better what is happening in Brussels, and MEPs are the perfect people to do that. After all, that's what you have been elected for. So tonight we will get to know you better and try to understand what you are actually doing in the Parliament and what you think about the EU. So perhaps to start off our discussion, could you briefly introduce yourself to our audience and we'll pick up from there?
Yes, thank you very much for this invitation. My name is Brando Benifei, as you said. I've been an MEP since 2014. I've been dealing with many different topics in these years, from youth policies to social policies, internal market, the foreign affairs also of the Mediterranean, and now I'm working a lot on digital issues, on artificial intelligence, but also I'm very much into the issue of the reform of the European Union, how to make it more democratic, more efficient. So I'm part of the Conference on the Future of Europe. That is a process that is starting now to discuss how to change the European Union and make it better for the future. It will involve citizens and the institutions in a series of dialogues and sessions that will last for 1 year. I hope it will be productive, because I think that we need to change the European Union. We need to make it more effective and more able to deliver on what the citizens ask us. On this period, especially, I think of the health policy, on the social policies, to build a more resilient union for the future. And also, I think that we need to have a union that is more tangible for citizens in their everyday life, and this means that we need to probably make it also simpler to be understood and less complicated, and this makes it felt as something that is far away. So yeah. I think this will be very, very important, and lastly, I want to say that because of this passion for the European integration and its possible evolutions, I've been granted the honor by the colleagues that are part of this group to be the chair, the president, to be precise, of the Spinelli group. That is the group of MEPs that are inspired by Altiero Spinelli, one of the founding fathers of the European Union, that has been advocating for a federal union of the European Union, so to have a stronger unity of our common project, and through this group we try to influence the debate on the union of the future.
Okay, so quite a lot of things on your plate, and I'm glad that you mentioned the Spinelli group, because I actually had a question from Reddit on that. So, but we will come to that later. So first, let's start at the beginning. So how and why did you go into politics, and how did you later become an MEP? What road did you take to get there?
Well, I started by. To be very blunt and clear, I started occupying my school in a big protest when I was 16, and we had a lot of marches in my city at the time, because there was a reform, a so-called reform of education, that in fact was just cuts to the funding, which was terrible, because in fact I've seen the decaying of the availabilities and opportunities for students. So I think it was good to protest at the time. It was a good idea. And my experience started by this kind of political engagement on the street. Then I've been involved in local politics. I've become interested, and I got to be elected also at the local level. But then I become interested in European affairs also by my studies, but also by visiting the European Parliament when I was 19, and that was very, very interesting for me. And I think these visits to the European institutions, that I hope we will be able to resume after the end, or anyway the final stages of the pandemic, will bring back many people to the institutions, because you can learn a lot by this kind of visits. They can give you a lot of inspiration. It was my case, and I started working on European affairs for my youth movement of my party, and then I got the chance to be a candidate, and finally I got elected. And so 2014 I became an MEP when I was 28, and now I've been re-elected for a second term 2 years ago.
And I mean, now there are quite a few quite young MEPs, but I remember that 5 years ago, 10 years ago, that was quite rare to have very young MEPs. So how does it feel? How do you approach becoming an MEP when you are 28, so actually very young? You just got out of your studies. How do you deal with that?
Well, it's very complicated transition also, because you suddenly have a lot of responsibilities, a lot of things to deal with that you know only partially. I've been dealing, as I said already, with European politics, so I was not completely unaware of the of what I had to do, but I had to learn very fast, because when you start, and this is also for the new MEPs of this time, when you start, you immediately have the legislative material coming from the previous mandate that suddenly is on your table, and you don't know about that because you were not there. And then in a few months, you have to start the examination of the new commissioners and to start the new European Commission. So the first 6 months of the mandate is very much like a car running at crazy speed that you need to deal with.
Yeah, you need to get up to speed.
Yeah, exactly. Or try to break it a little. I mean, but you have to run. So you have to learn, and then also, there are not so many young MEPs, especially last time. It was different. This time there are more, as you said, but also it's because the system is not so favorable for young young candidates, because either you have blocked lists that are very much decided by the political parties, and not so often they propose to the higher seats young MEPs, young candidates for MEPs, sorry. And when you have an open system of preferences, like in Italy, then you need to get a lot of votes to be elected. So in my case, I had a double thing, in the sense that the system in Italy is a preference vote, so people need to write your name, but it's a multi-regional electoral area that was quite okay for me, being active on a more national level on the European affairs with the youth movement. It was a good to have a large constituency, in fact, to be competitive. But also we had a great result of my party at the time, so we got in, a lot of us, and so this was why I got in the first time. And probably this is also how you get, in general, elected more young people, when your party gets more than it was expected in terms of support, and then you make a lot of younger candidates become MEPs. I know the case, for example, of the Socialist Party of Spain, that in this case, in this mandate, they elected many young MEPs from the young candidates, because they elected much more than they expected. And so candidates that were in weak positions actually made it, thanks to the fact that they elected much more than it was originally thought of.
Okay, interesting. And now let's get to the present. So you mentioned that you worked on a lot of different topics, youth policy, digital policy, foreign affairs, etc., etc. We know that MEPs are very specialized in practice. So what are the topics that today occupy you mostly?
Well, today I just finished a long work, in the sense I finished it in these weeks, a long work on the European Social Fund. That was my big thing for a long time. I've been negotiating the rules of the new 7 years period of the very big structural fund. It's more than, in the end, if you sum up the various side parts, it's around 100 billion euros. For the next 7 years, it's been important to work very precisely on it. For example, one thing that we obtained, that we fought, we had to fight for to get that, is that the new social fund will finance in a very clear way, also making it mandatory for the member states to deal with this, the so-called child guarantee. The projects for supporting poorer children, for education, childcare, nutrition, and housing. We made the regulation in a way so that the member states will have to spend money of the social fund to fight child poverty. And this is, for example, one important achievement that we obtained with long and complicated negotiations. But I'm proud that the Parliament could get that, and I could be one of the leading figures of these negotiations. Now in this moment, I'm the biggest thing I'm dealing with from the legislative point of view is, because we also do a lot of political activity, and especially I didn't say it, I forgot to say that at the moment I'm also the head of delegation of my political party in the European Parliament. This means that I'm the coordinator of my political force in the Socialists and Democrats group, my political group. So the Italian Partito Democratico is my party, and I'm the head of the Partito Democratico here in the Parliament. So I also do this, we can say, more general coordination and political role. But on the legislative side, my main effort now will be on digital and especially on artificial intelligence. I'm trying to see what kind of specific legislative role I will be getting. We are negotiating that, because the Parliament now will have to, in the next months, have to examine a proposal for a regulation of the proposed by the Commission to regulate AI in Europe, and the Parliament will have to appoint the negotiating team and the ones that will lead the amending work and the amelioration work that we will do on the text coming from the Commission. And for sure, I will have some role on that. We are deciding how much now. It depends if I can be a group rapporteur or a general rapporteur. This means that I will have a representative role to some extent of the Parliament on this specific legislative file and discuss this with the ministers and with the Commission, because as probably many that listen to us know, the legislative acts of the Union come from an agreement between the ministers in the Council and the parliamentarians in the European Parliament. And the original proposal, the text that we work on, comes from the European Commission. So this is how we work. And so we need to appoint people that do the leading work on this, and that will be my biggest effort for my legislative activity in the next period.
In the next few months, okay. And so, bearing in mind, so these things you're working on, and generally speaking, your topics you work on, what would you say are your top three, or I say top three, it can be top two, top one, whatever you want, but your top political objective, what you want to achieve policy-wise?
Well, I think that policy-wise, we need to build a European Union that is able to bring back people from desperation, from despair, from difficulty, like unfortunately we are in today. I mean, today we have a lot of people that are losing their jobs because of the pandemic, that they are unable to find one. Think of many young people, or they are underpaid, and inequalities are growing also in the richer countries. So I think also when I look at the work on the digital that I meant, I look at that with a social eye, with the idea that we need to build social cohesion, more equality, and fight against lack of opportunity, especially for the younger generations that have been paying a huge price with a lot of crises happening in Europe and in the world in the last decade, and they risk losing a lot of opportunity for the future. And I think we cannot stand that. That's unjust, and it's also not good for Europe as a whole.
Okay, interesting. I'm looking at the chat and I see that EBS is saying that he is very much a fan of regulation concerning AI. So perhaps can you tell us a bit more about what the Commission has proposed as a text in very broad strokes? What's the EU approach on AI?
Yeah, well, the approach of the EU on AI is I mean, we will see after the legislative work, but the original proposal now on the table from the Commission is trying to strike a balance between different interests. One is to have a regulation that doesn't hinder creativity, but supports innovation and ideas and the growth of an AI sector in the European Union. At the same time, defending our approaches and values as Europeans. That means defense of the fundamental rights, of the privacy, of data protection. So this means that we need to strike a balance, as I said, between innovation, business models that needs to be supported to be innovative, and fighting bad innovation. That means unregulated surveillance of workers and people, chatbots and AI instruments that are not consciously used by people, that people don't know they have an AI in front of them, or they don't have any redress possibility in front of AI mechanism. So we need to find a balance, and the Commission proposal is already good, but probably needs to be adjusted and ameliorated on a few more than a few aspects. For example, in my view, it's too weak on the indication on how to regulate the presence of AI in workplaces. And also, we need to be clearer that we are against any form of AI-fueled surveillance that gathers data that we don't really know how to protect. So we need to be careful on this, and we need to also be able to let these SMEs have the opportunity to get the data and the technological support to develop also a European AI, not leave it only to the bigger players, European or non-European, but also to support our SMEs that are the backbone of our economy. So as you see, there are different aspects, and we will try to bring these on a balance, and the Commission proposal already addresses parts of these concerns, but we will need to look at that and work on it some more.
Okay, I'm still looking at how EBS is reacting. So speaking from experience, artificial intelligence has already been deployed to spread misinformation. It's good to see that MEPs and the Commission are taking this threat seriously. So yeah, indeed, it's indeed a rising issue that MEPs and European Union in general is working on. And I mean, as Mr. Benifei mentioned, there are a lot of different aspect to take into account, whether it's well, the social aspect, the surveillance aspect, the misinformation aspect, and it's all about juggling all these different balls and try to fight to reach the perfect balance if it can be achieved. Yeah. So it's usually like a lot of work.
I like the metaphor, the juggler.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I will let you use that if you want. Yeah. So let's move on. So you mentioned that you are actually involved in the conference on the future of Europe. So for the viewers and those of you who don't know, the conference on the future of Europe is this new initiative that tries to associate citizens and get them to provide input on what they would want the Europe to do, how they would want Europe to evolve. And so that's a process that's going to last for a year around that. So it just started. So what would you like to see coming out of this conference?
Well, I want to be very clear. Some governments want the conference to be not very conclusive, like just a debate exercise. While I think that now, with all that happened, with all the things that happened, we need a real process of change and of reform of the Union. And only a real conference on the future of Europe can build that. This means that the parliament that will be present in the conference, the European Parliament, have to lead a process of proposal of reform of the Union, cancelling the veto power, making the institutions more democratic, strengthening the Parliament and Commission. We want to bring those proposals to the table and avoid that it becomes just an exercise of generic debate. We will fight for that, and I think for now the conference is not at the center stage of the political debate, while we will try to make some fireworks, so we can say, coming from the Parliament, so that it's not a dull exercise, but it becomes a real arena of exchange and of debate at the highest levels on the future of the European Union.
So what I get away from this is that in the big debate about whether the Conference of the Future of Europe should reopen the treaties or not. So you seem to be saying that you want the treaties to be reopened.
They must be reopened. Yes.
And so I have one question related to that from Ms. Derry on the conference. She asked how to get the European citizens on board. A lot of people outside the EU bubble don't know about it.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to say, because there is an online platform that is being used now progressively. They start to use it. Also today, after our dialogue, I will have an event that is through the platform, but the platform is still not fully used to its potential. But the thing is, if we don't make the conference relevant, because there is a political conflict going on that is clear between different options, if we don't go for that, I think the conference will not interest people, because people want to know which are the options on the table, and we need to look into them very clearly. And I think we can have two clear options. to keep the union as it is today, confusing, undemocratic to some extent, and ineffective, or build a stronger, more efficient, more effective, more democratic union that can deliver on fiscal policy, on social policy, on foreign affairs, and to pool sovereignty with the other between the member states, and not to keep the half-baked union that we have today. I think we need to hyper-politicize the debate, not have just a generic discussion about how we need to have a better union. I mean, this is, sorry, I don't want to be offensive, but it's stupid.
Oh, go
things,
ahead.
Okay?
Go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say it's bullshit, but anyway, it's stupid things. We need to look into the real hard matters. We have today a council, so a body of the governments that is unable to take decisions. And so we need to build a union that is much more united, much more effective, democratically capable of deciding than the union of today that is, again, halfway.
Half-baked, yeah. I agree. But do you I mean, it's one thing to want to push the treaty changes, but do you think it's realistic in the sense that, as you know, to change the treaties, you need to have all the member states to be on board? And would you expect the member state, I mean, how would you get Hungary on board? How would you get the Netherlands on board? How would you get Ireland on board? Do you think treaty change would be? But
please go back a few years. How could we do the Lisbon Treaty? The last treaty, it needed all the member states to agree. So we did it before, not 30 years ago. It was 2009. I mean 2007, and then 2009 it was in place. So I mean, today it's true. The union as it is today, it looks very difficult for because of the political divergences to imagine a unity of the member states to change the treaties. Well, I think we need to be creative. We need to consider whether it's not even to be considered to have some other structures between some member states that want to do more. Because this can be, in my opinion, a strong threat against those that don't want to reopen the discussion of the treaties. I see when you say we do it on our own, everyone wants to be there. So I think that we need to be very clear, very bold on this, and to propose a clear view. But this can only come from the parliaments, because the governments have such a huge, always huge media and electoral pressure that is making them look too much on the short time. The parliaments, national parliaments and European parliaments needs to be united, to push for a real change agenda, and the governments can be brought there. But we will fight for that. We need to open a fight, as I said. Otherwise, it will not be useful to have this conference.
And since we're on the topic, I see the whole debate about the vetoes, etc. And I see Blas F1 in the chat asking, should we remove the council?
I don't think so, because that's completely realistic. It's imaginable that we always have a body that is able to represent the member states. But the point is, today, the way it works is not a real legislative body. We need a real Senate of the states. But this means accepting that we do a kind of stronger supranational entity than the EU is today. We need to overcome the diplomatic UN-style way of working of the council that is today, because we always say that it's the ministers in the council, but that's fake. The ministers, they arrive at the end. All the time we have the ambassadors. The way the council works is a diplomatic body, while it has to do legislation with the legislative body, the traditional parliament, like the European Parliament is. So we need to change the council. That's true that the core of the issue is the council, because it's a council that was created when the union was smaller and with more political homogeneity. Now it's a council of 27 with too many divergences, and it's blocking our capability of being on time, efficient, strong on a lot of issues that define the standing of the union.
Okay, that's interesting. So I will just walk back a bit to something that is linked between this idea of democracy and what we were talking about earlier with AI. Snow in the chat is just mentioning that apparently there was a recent study by the university in Madrid that found that more than half of Europeans would want to replace politicians with AI. What would you think of that?
I lost a few words, sorry.
Apparently there's a study in Spain that found that more than half of the Europeans would want to replace politicians with artificial intelligence. What would you think of that?
I don't really trust this kind of polls, to be frank. In one year ago, it seemed that most Europeans thought that China was the only country in the world that was helping them with the COVID. I mean, I don't really think it's very relevant. One tendency that obviously comes from this kind of polls is the fact that there is a lot of distrust towards institutions today. And if we don't regain that, obviously democracy will lose its appeal, its interest, and people will like more authoritarian solutions, because the AI substituting politicians with the stage of development of AI that we have today means an authoritarian state where there is a very human person behind the AI that in fact is the one deciding, but it can hide behind the AIs. So it's a dystopia that can become a reality, unfortunately.
Okay, interesting. So moving on a bit, so you mentioned that you're the chair of the Spinelli group, so I don't have to ask you whether you're in favor of a federal union. That seems pretty clear. And I had a question I mentioned earlier from Reddit. As the chair of the Spinelli group, how do you look movements such as Volt? So Volt is this pan-European party that has currently one MEP in the Greens. So how do you look at these movements and their claim on being pan-nationalist? Are they helpful in promoting a sort of European federation and encouraging conversation on the topic? Or is it something that is already present in the different political groups anyway and in a way would splinter European federalism?
No, well, in my opinion, it's good to have this kind of pan-European new movements, but I don't think they can be, decisive and game-changing, because we also need to look at the deep historical tendencies that are also clearly based on the historical political families. And it's also by rearranging even or reorganizing them, that's a possibility to happen, that you can build a more united front for reform and for a stronger union. So I like them. I have also I work very well, for example, with Volt, but I don't think they can be a solution. They are not also a problem. They can be useful.
Okay, interesting. Still on the topic of Reddit, so I was chatting with Reddit members, and one of them was asking, and that would be relevant because, well, you're young, you're working on digital policies and all that. He was asking, why is there no Ask Me Anything with members of the European Parliament? We barely see any of those.
Barely see where?
On Reddit, on Reddit, you have this format called Ask Me Anything, where MEPs come around, people come around and say, okay, you can ask me any question and I will answer them. And you see that from a lot of people, but not a lot from MEPs.
I don't know. I don't use that. I do similar things on other social media. So I don't know why.
All right. I mean, so I don't find it surprising. I mean, I worked in Parliament as well, and I know that not everyone uses Reddit or even is aware of Reddit. So
I know of the existence of Reddit. also because of all the financial story that we know that happened that on the GameStop, etc.
Yeah.
But I don't use it. I have enough with the ones I have at the moment, but we will see.
Okay, interesting. So let me look at my questions. Let's talk about Italy for a bit. So Italy is among the founding members of the European Union, but we have seen some back and forth in Italian Euroscepticism over the past few years, notably in link with the financial crisis and the migration crisis. So, for instance, we've seen the rise of the Lega, the rise of the Five Stars Party, which were at the beginning they were quite Eurosceptic, but are now much less vocal about it. So, how would you describe the Italians' relations to Europe, both from the perspective of citizens, but also from political parties?
The European perception, the perception of the European Union in Italy has been, as you said, changing. I would say that at the moment there is a good sentiment, a sentiment in direction of a better opinion towards Europe because of the actions of the Union to start the recovery plan and to be present anyway and the vaccine crisis. It lasted some time, but not for a very long time. In the end, we found our way through. So the reality is that if we look at we can say in a more specific way into the answers of Italians on their opinion on the European Union, you find out that they have Euroscepticism, yes, but it's a peculiar one because it's not like in other European countries. Because if you look at for example, at the Eurobarometer, you find out that the Italians have a strong conviction. There is a lot of positive answers on the fact that we need a more united social policy in Europe, that we need a strong unitarian foreign policy, that we need a common defense policy. So a part of the Italian Euroscepticism is not a nationalist one, is a skepticism of the inability of, because of the inability of the Union, perceived the inability and probably partially real, of giving answers to the fundamental problems that people see. So a lack of trust in a union that appears too fragmented, too weak, and not a Euroscepticism that expresses a position against the union in general.
Okay, interesting. And so as an MEP, as a politician, part of your role is to go back to your voters and explain what you do. So do you the EU is all I mean, I'm not going to teach anyone that, but the EU is often very technical, but do you find it challenging to explain to your voters what the EU does, what are you doing, and make it relatable to their daily life?
Yeah, often it's complicated. You need to try to adapt the language, to change the way things are explained, because otherwise you sound very far away from reality. The truth is, very often we deal with very concrete, very close to people topics, but we are not always able to communicate that very clearly because of the complexity of politics, and sometimes at national level we can say the political theater hides the technical things that in the end are there too. So it's a matter also of a narrative, because the complication, the technical aspects are there at all political levels, from the very local to the European.
And speaking of narrative, I have Nestor in the chat who is asking, do you have any ideas on how to engage citizens in EU politics and creating pan-European discourse without over-dramatizing the EU political process and to create engagement? Without over-dramatizing the EU political process.
Yes, well, I think it's important to try to give clear examples to people. I try to do it on what are the concrete impact of what we discuss and we decide at European level in their daily life. So I try always to give examples when I talk, especially to students, about the fact that the union is not only about traveling and the Erasmus and these things that they always hear, but also that it deals with what they drink at the morning, the water or the milk they drink for breakfast, what they eat at breakfast, in the sense of food security, the air they breathe when they reach school, because we have regulations on the quality of air that are different in time. When I was a child, there was still a much more limited attention to this with the European rules. And then also the smartphones they use when they arrive, while they are going to school, they are full of applications that respect the European rules on data, and the way they are sold in the marketplaces online, they are based on European rules. I try to give, I mean, these are only a few examples of the concreteness of what we discuss. It's not only because sometimes Europe sounds like very big political issues that are very far from people, always difficult also to solve. Think of migration, always a lot of discussion, no results, empty papers. And the other narrative of the media is Europe dealing with the dimension of bananas. This is the two kind of narratives. Either Macron and Merkel, what did they say during the lunch? What was also, maybe sometimes they say what they eaten, which is not important, but they dedicate space to that. And what did they say, what did they written? And often this has no significance because there is no reality whatsoever, nothing happening after the European Council, because this is the truth. Very often European councils, because of what I said earlier, the huge political divergences that are in the Union of today are empty meetings. And the other narrative is the bananas, the oysters, while in the middle there is the real Europe. A lot of activity for citizens, for money, for projects, and rules for things that are important for the daily life. Rules not to create problems, but to help people.
I see the chat is having a bit of a PTSD crisis with the bendy bananas, the mountain of butters, and the lake of milk, probably from the Brexit debates. I can imagine, but it's indeed very difficult to always make the EU concrete, to explain how is it in your daily life. You mentioned a couple of times that you worked on social issues, and since you are in the Ample committee, I had this question that actually not came from me, but from a Reddit user like a month ago for another MEP interview, and he was asking about a European minimum wage. So you know that this has been quite a bit of debate, and there has been quite a lot of resistance from notably countries with high union membership, so think the Nordic countries, where they see the minimum wages as a threat compared to other member states. So how would you are you in favor of a European minimum wage, and B, how would you deal with these differences?
Yeah, I can tell you now, I work on the topic very much because I'm also a member of the employment committee. But I want to say that I unfortunately, I have a parliament urgency. So in maybe a few minutes earlier than expected, I will need to leave, just a few minutes, but maybe
that's fine.
We can have two final questions with this and another one. I on the minimum wage, I tell you, I have been working myself on the topic. I made amendments to the proposal of the Commission, and I'm in favor of the directive. I'm in favor of a minimum wage, and I know the issues. I know the issues that also some countries, also the Nordic countries, are posing, because they have a very unionized, social partners-based system of negotiating. That also the minimum wage that made them wary of legislation on this that might bring down the minimum wage. But then the way the regulation is written, or the directive is written, and with also the amendments that we made that also strengthen this part, is, I would say, proof for these worries, because it's clear that we leave all the space for the negotiated minimum wages between social partners. The directive acts on the spaces that are left out of negotiation by the social partners, which is very important for many European countries that are weak on the social dialogue. And so they need statutory legal minimum wages so that we can bring the wages and the workers' rights in general upwards, not downwards. We must compete on quality, not on exploitation. And so especially some countries that are poorer in general in the European Union can be helped to be pushing in higher wages, and then also the consumer habits, and build a better economy. First of all, this is what we think, but also more generally less competition on wages between the member states, which is important because we have been dealing with this, with the unfair competition, which is something that sometimes is used trying to exploit workers from other union countries and bringing them with systems that in the end are used to just pay less to the workers. Mm-hmm. And the minimum wage is part of this effort, we can say, to build a more socially cohesive European Union. Obviously, it's not exactly the same
everywhere, yeah.
Not the same minimum wage, but it's in each country, but it's linked to the economic data. But this is very, very important, and I'm really supportive and amending in the sense that I just explained the proposal of the Commission.
So I will give you the final question from the chat since you have to go. So the question is from Nestor again, who speaks from Sweden. He's asking, how can the EU better communicate policy? Especially since apparently he's familiar with the EU minimum wage debate. He can see that there is a great dissonance between the EU policy and the debate about it in Sweden in this case. So how can the EU better communicate?
Well, it's not easy because the European institutions would need to go against the national political parties, because this is a very propaganda style kind of debate. Because as I told you, the worries that come from the member states have been addressed in this case. And I think it's not easy because it's used as a very easy game. Everything that is slightly problematic is engrossed and given to the union. Every success is national. So this is the way sometimes politicians act, because the constituency they are elected by is national, not European, and this imbalance creates problems. So we will need to deal with it also when we work on the Conference on the Future of Europe. That's why it's important to have stronger European level, because this would reduce this imbalance and this risk of propaganda. In my view, the European institutions, notwithstanding everything I just said that must be considered, they must be more direct, they must be more bold, they must be more even aggressive sometimes in addressing this kind of sometimes of fake news, and in other cases, if it's a true issue, discuss it publicly, participate. We need our commissioners and the MEPs as much as they can to be more active, and I hope that also the media they learn to deal more effectively with the European issues, because until now we see a lot of misinformation even coming from respected newspapers and journalists. Simply they don't know, so they need to get more information. So it's all an ongoing process, but I see things moving, and I can be a little optimistic that we can do better and better over time.
Well, on this positive note, I will thank you for having given us the time and answered our question. I will give you the opportunity to say maybe a final word to our audience, if you wish so, before leaving.
Well, I want to say that I'm really happy I could do this exchange. I hope it was useful to learn a bit about our work in the parliament and about my ideas and my activity. And I hope that this has given some interest, some curiosity by the audience on what the European Union is doing, and especially what it can become. Because this is, in the end, in your hands. What it can become is a part of what the citizens of Europe are willing for the Union to become. And I think it's important to deal with it, because I think it came clear from what I tried to say, I tried to explain. If you don't care about the Union, well, the Union will care about you. It will decide about your life. So please take a bit of a look on what we do, criticize, give advices, because otherwise you will just be influenced by something you don't care about, and I think this is not good, and it's not good for democracy, because we need people to be engaged for democracy to work. And I still believe in democracy, notwithstanding all its flaws, because I think that when we look at how it is in authoritarian regimes around us, well, democracy has its problems, but it's better to keep it strong. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Have a good day. Chat, make sure to thank Mr. Benifei, and make sure to check him on social media. You can see his Twitter below the video feed. So on this note, thank you, Mr. Benifei. Have a good end of the day. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
All right, guys. So let me change this. Wow. So let's start our little talk. I thought the interview was interesting, definitely. He's invested. I didn't know he was the head of his delegation, so indeed he's a very busy man. I'm not surprised then that he has to run to other parliamentary obligations, but well, we still have heard quite a lot, and notably when it about the conference on the future of Europe, because apparently he's involved into it. Thank you, Blas, for subscribing. So he actually pinpointed a number of issues that we have already discussed in the past, but that are always useful to discuss about the potential of the conference of the future of Europe. So this whole debate, public debate about the EU, and what it can realistically give as a result. So obviously he was very adamant about the fact that there needs to be changes in the treaty, and he used an expression that is actually very, very true, which is that the EU is half-baked. So it's in the middle. It's half an international organization and half a state. Little Miss Dairy, I think I still have the tags from Tuesday stream. Oh, I thought they had cleared. Well, maybe people will come out that way, but okay. Thanks for letting me know. I will be more careful about that next time. Well, if it's a survival tag, it's not completely false. Thanks, EBS, for the subscription. So yeah, and I touched upon that the difficulty in practice of asking for treaty changes, because well, it's one thing to have the parliament say, oh, we want treaty change, we need treaty changes, but it's another thing to have them done, because like I mentioned, and you recognize after that, the EU is so big, so we have 27 different member states, different countries, and each of them has a veto to change the treaty, because you can only the treaties are for the EU like the constitution, and you can only change the constitution if everyone agrees to change it, and not everyone has an interest in doing it, whether it's Hungary, whether it's no, it's not only about Hungary, it's about, depending on what the changes are, not everyone has an interest in those changes, so not everyone wants these changes. And I thought it was interesting the way he proposed forward, in the sense that he implied that if and that would be likely the case, not all member states don't want to go for treaty changes, then member states that want to go forward could band together and do these things. And that's actually something that is legally possible under EU law. That's what we call the reinforced cooperation. So that means reinforced cooperation, that means that if you have, let's say, 10 member states that want to go together on a policy without the other member states, they have the ability to do so by creating this so-called reinforced cooperation. And the way he said that is use it as a threat, that if to isolate those who don't want to make these changes, to say, oh, if you don't want to go with us, then we will all band together and do it anyway, and you'll be on your own. And that's actually something that a number of member states on other policy feared quite a bit. So, for instance, if you go into the Eastern European countries, they were at some point in the past few years, they were a bit scared that the EU would do that, that Western European countries would do that, because, for instance, that would mean that the Western countries, so the richer country, would deprive the Eastern country of money. And so to punish to punish the Eastern country that would not be willing to follow the big Western country. So that's always a bit tricky, and that's why you haven't seen a lot of reinforced cooperation, because that's a bit of a screw you to the member state that do not want to follow. But saying, I like that, we need to move forward like that. The other will join when they see how good it is. Yeah, that's why, I mean, to an extent, it's like the opt-out, because in a way, so you remember that back when the UK was in the EU, and actually a number of other member states have that, you have what is called an opt-out, so the possibility for a particular country to say, well, if you want to do these rules, you can do them, but they don't apply to me. So I opt out of this regulation. I opt out of these rules. So, for instance, that's why the UK did not have the euro. That's why they did not have. They were not part of Schengen, etc., etc. You have a number of countries that are like that. But the problem is that you divide the EU, and as time goes, I mean, it can be a bit of wishful thinking to say, oh well, they will join when they see how good it is, because perhaps they will never see how good it is. Look at the UK. The UK in the end, the UK did not want to change its opt-out. Actually, the more we were going forward without them, the more they became alienated, and they didn't see the EU as it is now as the Europe that they wanted to join in the first place. So sometimes you have to be careful about that, because politically it can backfire. Because by saying, oh well, by showing the example, the other will follow. Yes, in a number of cases it can be true. In other cases, especially when it relates to very politically sensitive topics, like when we're talking about taxes, when we're talking about defense, about foreign policy, it becomes very complicated. Because the truth is, we criticize the veto, so the fact that you need all member states to be on board for a law to pass, for anything to change. But the fact is, in most policy areas, in most topics, you don't have already the veto, which already changed through the Lisbon Treaty to a majority system. And the topics that remain on the veto are in the end the most sensitive, politically sensitive, and the most directly related to national sovereignty. So it becomes very, very hard to go after to get member states to accept to give up these vetoes, or even to an extent, you can even say it's not necessarily legitimate for the EU to impose its will. So let's take for an example, foreign policy. If we were to change that in a foreign policy and defense policy, how would you do that? For instance, you have the Nordic country, you have Austria, which are neutral countries. Historically, they are neutral countries. And why would you take away their neutrality in a way if they found themselves in the minority? And then you have the most likely the defense policy that would be decided / run of heavily influenced by the defense heavyweight in Europe, so France, Germany, for instance. So there is a question of democratic legitimacy that is not can backfire as well, because then again, why would be the EU legitimate to overrule someone else's foreign policy, because everyone has different priorities? So I'm French, as everyone knows now. France has priority in the Mediterranean, towards the Arabic countries, which is not the same priorities that you can see in the Eastern Europe or in Northern Europe. So how do you define the priorities? Because it has concrete effects. So Blasef is saying, so you would prefer a stronger EU rather than a larger EU. That's a discussion that is relevant. You didn't notice I was French. Oh, I know you're ironic, being ironic about it, but you know, not everyone knows that. Anyway, but you make a good point, and there is a bit of a debate. So as you know, at the beginning of in 2002, you had 10 Eastern European countries that 2004 who entered the European Union. And actually, there has been a debate ever since that whether it was a mistake or not. Not whether these countries should be in Europe. The debate is not about that. The question is whether this enlargement should have such a massive enlargement should have been done altogether. Because we have seen the expectation back then was that, oh well, the Eastern European member states will change their ways to an extent and get up to speed and be closer to how Western Europe does. But what we've seen so far is not necessarily the case. We see that in Hungary, we've seen that in Poland, we see that to a lesser extent in Slovenia, etc., etc. So there is indeed this question, this debate of whether we have gone too fast in enlarging Europe, and which is now biting our ass, because a lot of problems that we see part of the issues that we see today within the EU are because of this different visions between Western Europe and Eastern Europe on a number of issues, whether rule of law being, for instance, the most obvious one, but not only on monetary issues, on budget issues, etc., etc. And that's also that's what justified back then the Lisbon Treaty, because we needed that reform, because otherwise the EU was just paralyzed. And to an extent, that's the situation that we are now in, to a lesser extent, because the EU is not paralyzed, but it's very complicated to make things move within the EU today. That's truth. But because of the whole veto thing, it becomes harder to find a balanced way. And that's the tricky thing, because it's one thing to say we need to change the treaty. It's another thing to decide what to change and how. Indeed, yeah, the EU, it's slow. Yeah, it is slow. Which brings me also to another point that he raised at some point, and he goes into the idea of the half-baked EU. I mentioned that already on a different stream, but today the EU is in between two. The EU is a very special organization. Very special. Because it sits in between a normal international organization. So you think about the UN. It's a very formal, very classic international organization. And so the EU is partly an international organization, but at the same time, it has competencies that looks like the one of a country, of a state, like of Germany, of France, of Poland, etc., etc. And the fact that the EU stands in between these two very contradictory situations makes things very complicated, because it makes the EU slow, for starters. Two, it creates different expectations. We've seen that with Brexit, because the British were wanting something that was more like an international organization, but they did not wanted a European state, and other countries think otherwise. So, and in the public today, that's something that does not play in favor of the EU, is that from a citizen point of view, So they are aware that the EU is around. They don't understand it necessarily, but they know it's there. But they judge it the way they judge the EU. They judge it the same way they would judge their own national government. So they expect from the EU things that they would expect from their member state, and things that, to a good extent, the EU today cannot do. They simply do not have the competence. They don't have the capacity to do it, and that feeds Euroscepticism to an extent, because it creates frustration again. The whole difficulty about the European Union today is about managing expectation and managing frustration, because, as he explained as well in the case of Italy, people are not anti-EU. They don't want the downfall of the EU. They just get frustrated because the EU does not do what they would like it to do, and the reasons that they don't do what they would like to do, that the EU doesn't do what Italians would like to do, is because, well, it's partly an international organization, and it's very slow, it's very complicated, it doesn't have the competences, etc., etc. But yeah, so it's very complicated. Yeah, you will have understood that. So let me check my notes if I saw something worthy of note. So I saw that some of you were quite happy that he talked about Volt, indeed, because there was a question about from Reddit about it, and he said that in his view, though Volt was not part of is not a problem, it's not a solution either, because he thinks he considers that even if you can have common European ideas, a lot of things depend on what you call historical tendencies, historical roots that relate to the tradition, the way German thinks, the way Swedish people think, the way Belgium thinks, the way Italian thinks, etc., etc. Litmus, they say he has a good point on the pat on the back of national success when it's EU success. Oh yeah, that's an absolute classic in terms of communication, and he nailed it in the sense that, yes, it's exactly the problem. When something is a success, it's thanks to the capital, and when something doesn't work well, or they don't want to endorse the unpopularity of something, well, then that's Brussels' fault. Exactly. So they blame the EU when things get wrong politically, and the problem is that Brussels. So when I say Brussels, I think the Commission. The Commission doesn't eat back in many cases because, well, like he said, it's a bit complicated to say to your own members, say, oh, well, you're lying, because there are people that they need to work with. Blessing, in what way does Volt interfere with that? I do not understand. Well, I think his point is that Volt I'm not a Volt member. I know about Volt a bit, but and what I'm gonna say may be wrong, so feel free to correct me. But Volt has a very pan-European approach, totally pan-European approach, and to an extent, his way of the way Mr. Benifei is seeing it is that it would not interfere, but it would deny the national or ignore the national specificities that exist, both in terms of national political culture, but also of national policy specificities. It goes in many different ways. We know that in Southern Europe, there is more of a tradition of social policies that do not necessarily exist in Northern Europe, or in a very different shape. And the approach of things is very different in Eastern Europe than in Western Europe. So it feels that this purely pan-European approach might deny that. So that's the way I understood this. So if someone is familiar with Volt, please feel free to explain. So I see Andrews London saying Volt is too idealistic for Eastern European tastes. That may be true. I do not know. Then again, I'm not as familiar with Volt. I know that they are present right now. They have one MEP in Germany, who is at the moment within the Green Group. But I don't know if they managed to pierce outside of Germany. So Volt works in a kind of federal way themselves, if you're not mistaken, so you don't see it as a problem. Maybe. Then again, I don't know. I genuinely don't know. So things something to be looked at on how. I mean, the question is then, how does what makes Volt different than a national party with a EU policy? How is Volt different than that? That would be the question, because then by reverse we can identify where it doesn't work. You can bring the MEP in here and ask him. Yeah, I wish. I mean, I had sent him like every MEP at the beginning of the year an invitation to speak on stream. He hasn't replied. I will do a new interview request in the next few weeks for September, for the interviews from September onwards. So fingers crossed he will accept this time. So that's definitely something that we can ask him if and when he decides to come over on the stream and answer your questions. Let me check my piece of paper. Oh yeah, I don't know if it was. I don't remember it. I think it was Snore who mentioned this Spanish study about replacing politicians with AI. So he was very skeptical about that. I have to say, I would be skeptical as well about that too, and specifically because, I mean, if you were to replace politicians by AI, you would get very arbitrary decisions, and that would not get a lot. It would well, logically speaking, it would miss the human touch, because part of the job of politics is not about doing technical works and say, oh, that works and that's it. It's about making things socially acceptable. So yeah, otherwise you would just get ruled by technicians, and that's why we need politicians to make things more palatable, more understandable by people. So that's something that indeed AI would definitely not be able to do, and personally I would be quite scared of leaving politics to AI. So I understand where he came from on that. And that was pretty much all I have noted on my side. I'm just checking in the chat if I missed any question. Bluff saying that we need a constitution. Well, the last time they attempted that, so in 2005, that pretty much exploded in their face big time. So today, whatever treaty change happened, I think no one would ever want to call that a European constitution, because that's politically toxic. That's just the best way to make the whole thing explode. So don't expect a new treaty that will be called EU constitution anytime soon. There is in France, especially in France, indeed, but not only there. You would see issues about the EU constitution outside of France, I'm pretty sure. One of the trendy topics in AI research is to make the AI explain to human why they make the decisions they are making. Yeah, but then again, indeed, it's one thing to explain technically what you are doing. It's another thing to make it palatable for people, because you could say, well, we need to let's take an absolutely not sensitive topic. Let's take climate change. So you know that we have to, if we want to avoid catastrophic consequences of climate changes, we need to avoid temperature rises by the end of the century. They need to be below 1.5 degree or 2 degrees. So to do that, you will need to slash CO2 emissions, energy consumption by a lot. If you were to ask an AI to do that, the consequences of that would be quite heavy, because an AI would just say, see that as figures. They say, oh well, figures X needs to be figures Y, so I will just slash it to reach that. With all the social consequences that I can have. So let's take an example. So we know that coal is an energy source that is very polluting. So you could say, yeah, we could just ban altogether the use of coal in for energy production. So great, except that then if you were to ask if an AI was to decide that and enforce it, then what do you do about Poland or about countries where they rely a lot on coal for historical reasons or for economic reasons or for whatever? If you say tomorrow you need to change everything, that has consequences of people, because you have a whole industry there, you have a lot of people that rely on that. So if you were to destroy completely from one day to another the coal industry for the objective of preventing climate change, which is justifiable, but you will create a lot of social problems. So that's why in politics, in legislation, you have transition periods to allow people to change things, and that's not something that an AI can necessarily do on its own. So it's not as part of politics. Politics is not a technical process. It's about taking technical facts and making them socially acceptable. Otherwise, you can break the back of your society. So that's not that easy. Not sensitive topic, climate change. Yeah, Greta would disapprove. I think that everyone would agree that it's definitely a sensitive topic. Not necessarily that it should be a sensitive topic, but de facto it is. Anyway, I've been blabbering for quite a while now. So if someone wants to raise a point, go ahead. Well, I keep scrolling up to see if I have missed anything, but otherwise I'm not going to bore you to death with my blabbering, and I will let you go into my conclusion. Okay, I don't see anything, so let me wrap this up. So I hope that you enjoyed the interview. I think it was quite interesting. Don't hesitate, as usual, to give me the feedback on Discord or on Twitter, and to follow me there. All the links are in my bio, so feel free to click and follow. It's always very helpful for the channel, help me grow. Next week we will go back to the normal schedule of Tuesday interview. We will normally go east with an interview of Romanian MEP Drago Pislaru. I still need to confirm the exact time of the interview with him, but in principle it should take place on Tuesday evening. So stay tuned on Twitter and on Discord to know about the exact time. But Tuesday evening interview with Romanian MEP from Renew. As always, I hope you enjoyed. Give me all the follows, all the things, so that we can keep growing. I thank you all again for being there tonight. Thank you for the subscription, and I wish you all a good evening and a good weekend. And I will see you all very soon. Bye, everyone.